Okay, let's unpack this one. I want you to just close your eyes for a second. Well, obviously, don't close your eyes if you're driving or operating machinery or something. But if you're safe, picture this scene. It is August 16th, 1967.
Right in the middle of the summer of love.
Exactly. The whole world is shifting, culturally speaking, but we are zooming in on a very specific, very grounded spot in New York City, specifically the lobby of the Paramount Hotel.
A very classic, bustling midtown location.
Yeah, and inside that lobby, there is a coffee shop called Rudd's. It's about 3:45 in the afternoon. It is loud. You have dishes clattering, waiters shouting out orders, the smell of, mid-century cigarette smoke and cheap coffee in the air. People are just rushing in and out, this constant stream of New York humanity.
Which is pretty much the textbook definition of a distracting public space.
Right. And sitting at a table in the middle of all this, looking completely normal, are three people having coffee. But in reality, one of those people, a woman named Jane Roberts, is doing something that completely defies explanation. She's ordering coffee, she's looking at her companions, but simultaneously she is channeling a multidimensional consciousness named Seth.
Literally right under the noses of the customers eating their bagels at the next table.
Exactly. This is what we are calling stealth mediumship. And today, on this deep dive, we're going to break down exactly how she managed to do it, why she had to do it, and the surprisingly specific predictions that actually came out of this coffee shop session.
It really is a fascinating look at the raw mechanics of consciousness.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually think of channeling as this very dramatic, eyes closed, booming voice type of event. But this is highly tactical. It's subtle.
It's like the spy novel version of channeling. So for our source material today, we are digging deep into session 361 of the early sessions, book 8 of the Seth Material.
Recorded, as you mentioned, on August 16th, 1967.
Yes, and before we really get into the weeds here, we have to state for the record that this deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are just here to explore the fascinating history and the psychological mechanics of these sessions.
Precisely. And our mission today is really threefold. First, we want to understand how Jane Roberts adapted her unique abilities to a very public setting, this whole stealth Seth concept. Second, we're going to analyze some highly specific business predictions made for their guest, Raymond Van Over. And third, we are going to look at the physical toll this so-called light trance took on Jane.
Because it turns out looking completely normal while channeling is actually way harder than doing the full dramatic deep trance.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive cognitive load.
I can only imagine. It sounds like trying to do complex calculus in your head while simultaneously maintaining a polite conversation about the weather with a stranger. But, times 1,000.
That is actually a really good analogy for what we're going to see her doing.
So settle in, grab your own cup of coffee. Hopefully you don't have a multidimensional entity whispering in your ear while you drink it, and let's get into this. It's going to be a relaxed, maybe slightly chilling, but definitely fun ride today.
I am more than ready. Where exactly are we starting?
We have to start with the context of the day itself, because this wasn't just any random Wednesday for Jane Roberts and her husband, Rob Butts. This was a doubleheader.
Which is incredibly rare in the history of the Seth Material up to this specific point in time.
Right. We're looking at session 361, but earlier that exact same day, they had already done session 360.
And that is highly significant because channeling, at least as Jane experienced it, is completely exhausting. It is not something you just flip on and off like a light switch without any physiological consequences. Usually they would have one session, and that would be it for the entire night. Maybe two sessions a week total, but two in one single day, separated by just a few hours.
It really signals a massive evolution in her stamina.
It does. It shows that her psychological and physical circuitry, if you want to use that term, was becoming much more robust. She was essentially getting better at handling the voltage of the experience.
So let's set the stage for the cast of characters sitting at this table at Rudd's. We have Jane, obviously. We have Rob, her husband, who is acting as the scribe, probably scribbling down notes furiously. And then we have the guest.
Right, Raymond Van Over.
And who exactly was he in this context?
He was the associate editor of the Parapsychology Foundation. So this is a very serious guy. He is deeply embedded in the professional industry of the paranormal, so to speak. His office is at 29 West 57th Street, right there in the city.
So this isn't just a casual friend they're grabbing lunch with. This is a professional meeting. It's networking.
Exactly. They had met him at noon, just briefly, and he had to run off to another appointment, and they all agreed to reconvene at 3 o'clock at the Paramount.
But before we get to the actual coffee shop, something happened in between those two meetings that I think really tells us everything we need to know about who Jane Roberts was as a person. And it involves a phone call from a television show.
Ah, yes. The Alan Burke TV show incident.
Now, for our listener who maybe wasn't watching daytime New York television in the late 60s, Alan Burke was a very well-known, somewhat sensationalist talk show host. And apparently his producers were extremely interested in getting Jane on the air.
They were. Jane and Rob were hanging out at a publisher's office, Frederick Fell's office, actually, and Jane gets this urgent message that a Mr. Shapiro from the Alan Burke show is holding on the line for her.
Now, think about this. Most people in her position, if they're trying to promote a new book on ESP or get their name out there as a working medium, they would absolutely jump at this. National TV, big New York City media exposure.
It's the golden ticket for an author.
And what does Jane actually do?
She gets on the phone and spends 15 straight minutes explaining to this producer why she does not want to be on the show.
15 minutes talking herself out of a major television appearance.
It is remarkable, and I think it is totally crucial for understanding the baseline credibility of this source material. Jane was not looking for fame. She wasn't trying to be a spectacle. In fact, she specifically tells them she wants to avoid becoming a, quote, circus act.
She had serious integrity about the work.
She really did. She viewed herself primarily as a serious investigator. Yes, she was the subject of the phenomenon, but she was also the scientist studying it. She knew that going on a sensationalist talk show where people just want to see spooky tricks would completely cheapen the work. It would make it about the shock value rather than the actual philosophical content.
I love that detail. It really grounds her character for me. She's not out there chasing clout. She is actively chasing the truth.
Exactly. So with that strong sense of integrity firmly in place, she heads over to the Paramount Hotel to meet Ray Van Over.
And this brings us right into the second section of our deep dive, the stealth method itself.
Right. So picture them sitting in Rudd's coffee shop. They've had a nice, normal chat about parapsychology, getting to know each other's backgrounds. And then suddenly, Jane feels it.
The signal.
Yeah, she announces that Seth is about.
Now, usually when Seth comes through, what does that actually look like?
In the comfort of their own living room in Elmira. It's incredibly dramatic. Jane's voice deepens significantly. The cadence changes completely. She always takes off her glasses. Her eyes often go very wide and dark, or she shuts them completely. Sometimes she paces around the room. It is a full-body, highly visible takeover.
Right, and if she did that in a busy midtown coffee shop,
They would probably call hotel security. Or at the very least, everyone would stop eating their bagels and just stare at her.
it would be a massive scene. And Jane, as we just clearly established, hates making a scene.
She despises it. So they have a real dilemma here. They actually discuss getting up and going up to their hotel room to do the session in private so she can go into a deep trance.
But she stops them.
Right. Yeah, Jane decides she wants to try something entirely new. She wants to see if she can filter this multidimensional information without the heavy theatrical overlay.
This is the stealth mode. How exactly does she describe the feeling of this?
She describes feeling Seth's presence just below consciousness.
Just below.
Yeah, it's a great phrase. Instead of stepping aside completely and letting Seth drive the car, she's staying firmly in the driver's seat. But Seth is, let's say he's in the passenger seat, whispering the turn-by-turn directions.
Or kind of like an earpiece.
Yes, that is the perfect modern analogy. Imagine a live news anchor. They're looking right at the camera, they're smiling, they're acting completely natural. But in their earpiece, a producer is frantically feeding them breaking news. They have to listen to that internal voice and speak it out loud, while simultaneously maintaining the outward appearance of just having a normal, relaxed conversation.
That sounds incredibly difficult from a cognitive standpoint.
It's often called dual consciousness, or at least a specific variation of it. She has to maintain her physical and social awareness of the coffee shop, tracking the waiters, the background noise, the social cues of the men at the table, while also simultaneously opening up a psychic channel to this non-physical stream of data.
And Rob specifically notes in the source material that there was a constant stream of people passing right by their table.
Constant visual and auditory distraction.
But they decided to just go for it anyway.
Ray Van Over actually encouraged her. He told her that many professional mediums he knew operated exactly this way in public, and the professional validation really seemed to give her the confidence to just try the experiment.
So she keeps her glasses on for this.
Glasses stay on, eyes are wide open. Voice remains mostly her normal, everyday tone. She's actively trying to speak for Seth in a natural manner.
That is just wild to think about. It's straight out of a secret agent movie. You're sitting there sipping your lukewarm coffee, and the lady across from you is literally bringing through complex information from another dimension, while the guy at the next table is just loudly complaining about the Yankees.
The juxtaposition of the totally mundane and the deeply metaphysical is really what makes this specific session so memorable.
Okay, so she establishes the connection. She's locked into stealth mode. What actually happens next?
Well, now we get to the absolute meat of the session, the data itself.
Right, because Ray isn't just there to hang out and drink coffee. He's going through a major, stressful life transition.
He is. He reveals to them that he's planning on leaving his secure job at the Parapsychology Foundation. He's planning to launch his own independent publishing business in the fall.
That is a bold move in any decade.
Very bold. And naturally, he's anxious about it. He wants to know if it's going to work out.
And what does Stealth Seth have to say about this publishing venture?
First, he gives the broad reassurance. Seth says the venture, quote, should be a successful one.
Nice. Good start. But, general reassurance is easy. Anyone can say, hey, you're going to do great.
Exactly. That's what I call the fortune cookie level of mediumship. It doesn't prove anything. But then it gets highly specific.
Here's where it gets really interesting for anyone analyzing the data.
Seth, speaking through Jane, who, remember, is just sitting there acting like they're chatting about the weather, gives a specific set of initials, WC.
WC.
Seth says that WC is a person who is heavily involved in Ray Van Over's new publishing venture.
Now, let's pause and think about that. If you're just taking a wild guess, WC is not exactly the most common set of initials in the English language. It's not JS for John Smith or MB.
No, it's quite specific. And Ray Van Over's reaction to this is immediate. He states right then and there that the data is quite correct.
Boom, direct hit.
He then proceeds to actually name the person to Jane and Rob. Now, here's a little moment of human error in the transcript that I actually really love. Rob didn't write the full name down in his notes.
Oh, come on, Rob. The one time you need the full name.
I know, it's frustrating.
Okay.
But you have to picture him, he was scribbling fast on a notepad in a coffee shop, trying to keep up with the flow of conversation. But the validation from Ray was clearly recorded. Ray knew exactly who WC was, and he confirmed it.
That is very impressive. But Seth wasn't quite done with the business predictions, right?
No, he wasn't. And this next one wasn't quite as sunny and optimistic as telling him he'll be successful.
What was the warning?
Seth warns them that a sponsor or a member of this new society or business is going to pull out.
Ooh, trouble in paradise before it even starts.
Seth explicitly describes this person as a disrupting influence.
Did Rob manage to catch this detail in the moment?
Interestingly, no. This is one of those specific details that came back to them a bit later. Rob notes in the text that he didn't write it down in his initial hurried scrawl. But after reading the notes back, Jane reminded him, saying something like, hey, remember Seth said that guy would pull out? And Rob realized he remembered that detail perfectly, too.
See, as an analyst, I actually really like that little detail. It feels highly authentic. If you were faking a document after the fact to make yourself look like a perfect psychic, you'd make the notes flawless. You'd just write, and then I wrote down exactly what happened. Admitting that human memory played a role and that they had to corroborate with each other later adds a huge layer of honesty to the reporting.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It shows the messy, chaotic nature of the live session. They are in a loud coffee shop. Things are moving fast. Ray is reacting verbally. Jane is managing two streams of consciousness. It's messy, because real life is messy.
Now, to be completely fair to the source material, not every single thing was a direct, undeniable hit.
Correct. We have to look at the misses, too. Seth mentioned a J and also a letter toward the end of the alphabet.
Which is pretty incredibly vague.
Very vague. And Rob explicitly notes in the transcript that this was not definite enough to count as a hit.
I really appreciate that Rob calls that out himself. He doesn't try to stretch the facts or shoehorn it into fitting some random person Ray might know. He just says, essentially, that was weak data.
It perfectly establishes the high standard of evidence they were holding themselves to. They weren't just looking for convenient excuses to believe. They were looking for hard, verifiable hits, like the WC initials.
So just to recap the data, we have a successful business prediction, a highly specific identification of a partner using exact initials, and a warning about a future disruption. All of this delivered over a quick cup of joe.
all while actively trying not to look like a complete weirdo in front of the Midtown lunch crowd.
But this immense effort, it came with a physical cost. And this brings us to section 4 of our outline, which is something I really want to unpack deeply. The physical reality of the metaphysical experience.
This is honestly the part that fascinates me the most from a purely physiological perspective.
Because logically, you'd think, oh, a light trance. That must be so much easier on the body than a deep, dramatic trance.
It's intuitive to think that, but it's entirely wrong. Think about holding a difficult yoga pose. If you just lay completely flat on the floor, representing the deep trance, you're completely relaxed. You've surrendered to gravity. But if you have to hold a plank position, if you have to actively hold yourself up against the force of gravity, that takes incredible muscle tension and energy.
That is a fantastic way to visualize it. Jane describes this experience not just as a typical session, but as a completely new state of consciousness.
And she makes sure to list her specific physical symptoms for the record.
Let's go through those because they're fascinating. First one she notes is feeling freezing cold.
Specifically located at her forehead.
That is so pinpoint specific. It's not just a general, oh, I felt chilly in the room, but a localized, freezing physical sensation right at the third eye area, essentially.
Right. And then following that, she describes an internal buzzing sensation.
But she clarifies that this wasn't a physical vibration, right?
Yes, she was careful to note it was non-physical.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like a vibration in her consciousness itself, or perhaps running through her nervous system without making her physically shake.
And this is my favorite part, the most deeply human detail of all.
This sudden, intense desire for urination right at the end of the session.
I'm sorry, I just love that they included that. It is so perfectly unmystical. You are sitting there literally channeling the profound secrets of the universe, and suddenly your bladder is just like, hey, excuse me, we have a biological situation here?
But from a biological standpoint, it makes total physiological sense. When you undergo a massive shift in nervous system states, moving from a highly aroused, intense focus back to a parasympathetic baseline, your body's physical processes change rapidly. It's a classic sign of a sudden physiological state shift.
And how did she feel immediately afterward?
She described feeling very shaky inside.
Like a massive adrenaline crash.
Exactly like an adrenaline crash. And what's interesting is that Ray Van Over chimed in and mentioned that he had actually seen those exact same physical effects in other working mediums. It externally validates that she wasn't just making these symptoms up. She was experiencing a well-known, documented physiological response to this specific kind of mental activity.
But reading the transcript, the mental aspect of this seems even more exhausting than the physical symptoms. She specifically said she felt that she could have easily just slipped right over the edge into a deep trance.
That is the real danger of stealth mode. She's standing right on a mental precipice. The deep trance is actually the comfortable free fall for her. It's where her brain is used to going when Seth shows up. To stay teetering on that edge to keep her balance so she doesn't literally slump over in a public coffee shop, she had to actively work.
She had to consciously fight the magnetic pull of the full channel.
Yes, she had to use her willpower to keep the door only halfway open. And that mental tension, that constant internal resistance, is likely what caused that shaky adrenaline feeling. It requires immense, sustained mental discipline.
It is deeply impressive. It really reframes this whole concept of mediumship for me. It's not just a passive gift that happens to you. It's an active skill. It's a cognitive muscle that you have to train and build up.
Absolutely. It is athletic in its own unique way.
Now, speaking of trying to maintain that delicate balance, let's talk about the interference they dealt with. Because it wasn't a perfectly clean connection the whole time.
No, it wasn't. And this really highlights the extreme fragility of this new stealth state she was trying out.
Jane explicitly mentions that when Ray Van Over started talking specifically right when he was verbally reacting to the WC initials, it was highly distracting to her.
Right. In a normal, deep trance setting, Seth is the one completely in control of the physical apparatus. He can handle interruptions smoothly, or he just loudly talks right over them. But here, Jane is the active filter. She has to actively listen to Seth's internal voice, and simultaneously, she is physically hearing Ray's external voice.
So when Ray talks excitedly,
it literally jams the internal signal.
It's like having two different people talking into opposite ears at the exact same time about two completely different subjects.
Exactly. She noted in the record that the mere sound of another person's voice can completely disrupt the flow of the channeled data unless she has specifically asked for that person to speak.
So she is putting all this effort into holding onto this delicate thread of information from Seth, and Ray's sudden voice acts like a pair of scissors threatening to just snap it in half.
It shows exactly how delicate and untested this new state really was for her. She hadn't mastered this yet. This was essentially the maiden voyage of Stealth Seth.
But despite all that signal interference, they still managed to get some really good industry tea out of the meeting, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. The professional parapsychology world in 1967 was apparently just full of behind-the-scenes drama.
I love this part. What is the scoop they get from Ray?
Well, Ray reveals a pretty closely guarded secret about a recent book review.
You tell.
So, Jane had recently written a book focused on ESP, and it had been formally reviewed in the Journal of Parapsychology.
Which is a very prestigious peer-reviewed journal in that specific field.
Right. Now, the review was published under a pseudonym. Nobody supposedly knew who wrote it. But Ray, sitting in the coffee shop, just spills the beans to them. It was actually written by Elaine Garrett.
Elaine Garrett.
Yes, the daughter of Eileen Garrett, who was a deeply famous medium and the actual founder of the Parapsychology Foundation where Ray worked.
Oh, the plot thickens. It's literally like finding out who Gossip Girl is, but for 60s ghost hunters.
It really just shows how incredibly interconnected and insular that whole world was back then. Everyone knew everyone else's business.
And Ray also talked about setting up some future experiments with Jane, right?
Yes, he did. He was actively organizing clinical experiments, testing astral travel.
Astral travel, like a controlled out-of-body experiences.
Exactly. And Jane enthusiastically agreed to participate in those future tests for the Foundation.
It paints such a vivid picture of a time when this kind of fringe research was just exploding into the mainstream. You have these serious people trying to apply rigorous scientific methods to these wild, mystical experiences. They are meeting in midtown coffee shops, planning clinical experiments, gossiping about who secretly wrote what academic review. It just feels very vibrant and alive.
It was a true frontier of human exploration. And Jane and Rob were sitting right on the absolute cutting edge of it.
So let's zoom out a bit as we get toward the end of our outline. We have covered the stealth channeling technique, the highly accurate business predictions, the severe physical side effects, and the parapsychology industry gossip. What does this all actually mean in the grand scheme of the Seth material?
Well, if we connect this single coffee shop meeting to the much bigger picture of their work, this session is a massive pivot point.
How so?
Up until this specific day, Seth was largely what you'd call a living room phenomenon. The experience was entirely confined to the controlled safety of their private apartment in Elmira, New York. But here, in session 361, the phenomenon confidently steps out into the real world.
It goes mobile.
Exactly, it goes mobile. It conclusively proves to Jane and to Rob that she doesn't strictly need the perfect controlled conditions. She doesn't require the absolute silence, the darkened room, the specific pre-session ritual. She can actively access this multidimensional information right in the middle of the chaos of a Manhattan coffee shop.
That heavily suggests that the connection to Seth isn't dependent on the external environment at all. It's entirely dependent on Jane's internal cognitive state.
Precisely. It radically internalizes the locus of power. It shows that this expanded consciousness is fully portable. You can literally carry access to the multiverse with you while you order a cheese Danish.
Which is deeply empowering, but also, a little bit terrifying when you really think about it.
A little bit, yeah.
But let's circle back to the actual data for a second. The WC prediction.
Yes, the initials.
For our listener who might be approaching this with a healthy dose of skepticism, and we always welcome critical skepticism here.
Always. Critical thinking is absolutely key to studying this material.
How do you practically explain that hit? If you're a hardcore skeptic, you could just wave it away and say, well, it was just a lucky guess, right?
Yeah. You certainly could try to say that. But let's actually look at the mathematical odds. If you just pick two random initials out of thin air, there are 26 letters in the alphabet. 26 times 26, that's 676 possible combinations.
So you're looking at roughly a 1 in 676 chance of just guessing it perfectly.
Roughly, yeah. And she didn't just throw out WC and say, do these mean anything to you? She specifically stated that WC is a person who is heavily involved in this brand new venture. And Ray immediately, without hesitation, confirmed it.
And the fact that Rob didn't officially record the full name on paper, but Ray confirmed it verbally in the moment, actually adds a lot to the texture of the event for me. It feels like a genuine, fast-paced conversation, not some carefully scripted performance they prepared beforehand.
It really does. And you have to remember the historical context. Jane knew absolutely nothing about Ray's private business partners. They had literally just met him briefly at noon that same day. She hadn't hired a private investigator to do a background check. There was no Google in 1967.
That is a fantastic point. There was no LinkedIn stalking before a meeting back then.
She was flying completely blind, or rather, she was flying purely on Seth's radar.
So we have a very compelling, documented case for non-local information access.
We absolutely do.
And we also have a deeply compelling case for the severe physiological cost of maintaining that access.
The shaky inside feeling, the freezing cold forehead, it serves to remind us that we are, at the end of the day, biological machines. Even if we are successfully channeling high-frequency non-physical consciousness, we are still running that energy through a very physical biological wire, and that wire can get incredibly hot.
That is a very vivid image, Jane acting as a human resistor in an electrical circuit.
Exactly, and she was actively learning how to handle more and more voltage. That is exactly what this rare doubleheader day was all about, upgrading her internal wiring.
I really love that perspective. So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive into session 361, what are the main key takeaways for you? What should the listener remember?
Three main things really stand out to me. First, the incredible adaptability of the human mind. Jane proved that mediumship can be functionally integrated into normal social reality. It doesn't always have to be hidden away in the dark.
The stealth mode breakthrough.
Second, the undeniable specificity of the data. The WC hit reminds us that the Seth material isn't just broad spiritual philosophy, it contains hard data. Seth regularly provides verifiable, real-world facts.
It's not just vague platitudes about love and light. It's highly practical stuff like, hey, watch out for that specific guy, WC. He's going to cause trouble.
And third, just the profound humanity of the whole situation. The awkward bathroom breaks, the sheer nervousness, the distracting noise of the coffee shop, her stubborn refusal to go on national TV. It thoroughly grounds this lofty metaphysical event in the deeply personal, relatable human experience.
It makes it feel completely real.
It makes it accessible to anyone studying it.
Well, I think that is a truly fantastic place to leave the analysis for today. But before we officially sign off, we have to make sure we give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely. The research for this deep dive was based entirely on the Seth material, specifically drawing from the early sessions book 8.
Which is published by the New Awareness Network.
And if you found this discussion even remotely interesting, please do not just take our word for any of this. You need to go straight to the primary source, read the books, experience the raw sessions for yourself.
You can find all of them at sethcenter.com/early sessions. Seriously, if you're into this, go check out their bookstore. It is an absolute treasure trove of information.
It really is a goldmine.
And we want to leave you with a final thought, something for you to chew on as you go about the rest of your day.
Lay it on us.
We spent all this time talking about Jane Roberts intentionally splitting her consciousness. One part of her brain is ordering coffee and making polite small talk, while another part is seamlessly accessing the future and pulling data from another dimension. If the human brain is genuinely capable of that, of running two completely different, highly complex operating systems at the exact same time, what massive unused potential is sitting completely dormant in your own head right now?
That is a deeply provocative question to leave them with.
Maybe you're perfectly capable of activating your own stealth mode. Maybe we all are, and we just don't know it yet.
We probably just need to learn how to properly tune the dial.
Exactly. So until next time, keep your mind open, but always keep your feet firmly on the ground.
And enjoy your coffee.